Thank you everyone for being here today for the 8th annual Semana de Raza week here at PCC Rock Creek. It's wonderful to have all of you guys here on campus. Today we'll be having a presentation from Mr. Todd Miller, author of Border Patrol Nation. He is right here on my right hand side. But before I introduce you to Mr. Todd Miller, let me introduce to our Dean Associates, Brenda Ivelis.
Hi, y'all. I'm the Associate Dean of Students, Brenda Ivelis. How are y'all doing tonight? Today. It's not tonight yet. I'm already ready for it to be Friday. All right. So this topic is really dear to me, and so I'm very excited that Mr. Todd is here today to talk to you about something that is definitely happening within our borders. A lot of times when we talk about immigration, when we talk about militarizing the border, we think about Syria, we think about Jordan, we think about Palestine, we think about all these places that are really far away. But we don't think about that a couple of states away, this is happening within our borders. And this topic, I hope, really drives you to action, drives you to think about what's happening and how it affects people here at PCC Rock Creek, here in Washington County, here in Oregon, because it's our students are here, it affects our communities, and we have to really be conscious. About, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, I went to a workshop, and they were talking about how a lot of times about 80% of us are not awake during the day. And you're like, okay, this is a little woo-woo stuff, right? Okay, I'm being awake, I'm awake right now, right? What they meant is that most of us are such in auto mode, right? Have you ever been driving and you're like, how did I just get home? Like, I got here and I'm like, what? I'm home. And you're like, woo, at least I didn't hit someone, right? It's because we're not awake. We're not paying attention to life. It's just happening to us. And so I challenge you to be awake today, fully awake. That means fully present. Put your phone aside unless you're gonna tweet something really cool. Pay attention, wake up, because Mr. Miller, Mr. Todd here is gonna be, same person, is gonna be talking about something that will challenge you. And if it challenges you, you'll feel it in your heart. If you disagree or agree, you're gonna feel it, you're gonna know. And so without further ado, because he's going to be talking to y'all for a little bit, let me give you a little bit of background from Mr. Todd. For the last 15 years, he's researched about and worked on immigration and border issues on both sides of the border, the U.S.-Mexican border. He's worked with organizations such as Border Links, Witness for Peace, NACLA. He's traveled between Tucson, which I love Tucson, it's so nice, and the Buffalo, Niagara Falls area, where he grew up and spent the majority of his life close to the U.S. international boundary, both south and north. And I think what's interesting about that is that he's been able to see how people are treated differently. And so I'm excited to hear that narrative from you today. He also has writings about the border that have appeared in the New York Times, Tom Dispatch, Mother Jones, The Nation, Al Jazeera English, and Salon, among other places. So, without further ado, Mr. Todd, let's clap for him and welcome him.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the nice introduction. Yeah, I like the part about being awake, and I hope I'm going to take your advice to heart. Thanks a lot for having me here. It's really an honor to be here. I've been in Portland since Saturday. I've been in Oregon since the beginning of last Tuesday. Just to show you, this is my presentation, and you can see all the notes written in the margins. So it's it's been a kind of a whirlwind, but really good trip. And this is actually my last presentation. I'm heading back to where I live in Tucson, Arizona tomorrow. So it's good to be here with you. To start, I just want to ask a question. Who here has been to the U.S.-Mexico border? Quite a few people. All right. Recently? like in the last year, a couple years? Okay. So you see how it looks right now. If you just go and just get a physical look at the U.S.-Mexico border, you'll see, what, a 20-foot wall. If you're, depending on where you are, if you're in an urban area, you'll see a 20-foot wall, different styles of walls. You'll probably see camera posts. You'll probably see a lot of agents. A lot of concentration of what would be called a border enforcement apparatus. But is this how it looked 20 years ago? No. Does anybody even know when the Border Patrol started, the U.S. Border Patrol? So if you look at when the U.S. Border Patrol started, it was 1924, right? So if the United States of America was founded in 1776, you go 1776 to 1924, and that's a lot of years that there was no such thing as the U.S. Border Patrol, right? From 1924 to the early 1990s, 1924, maybe 800 agents was the first. There's about 800 agents in the agency. Most actually, there was 2 stations, one in El Paso, Texas, one in Detroit, Michigan. There was actually more agents in Detroit, Michigan when it started. That changed, of course. From 1924 to the early 1990s, how many agents do you think there were in the early 1990s? Just a guess. Border Patrol agents, green uniformed U.S. Border Patrol agents that were out guarding the U.S.-Mexico border, or actually also the U.S.-Canada border. 2,000. That's approximately 4,000. And that was the early 1990s. Does anybody have any idea how many U.S. Border Patrol agents there are now?
40,000?
Not 40,000, but it's 21,000. 40,000 is an interesting number because if anyone saw the immigration reform bill that was passed in the Senate in June of last year, it hasn't been passed, but it was passed in the Senate. They were calling for 19,000 new Border Patrol agents as part of that. So the number would become 40,000 if that bill were to pass, which it doesn't look very likely. But right now there's about 21,000. So the point of this is it grew from 1,000 to 4,000 from 1924 to 1994. Then from 1994 to now, it grew from 4,000 to 21,000. That's a 5-fold increase. That's a significant increase. U.S. Border Patrol is part of the Customs and Border Protection. Customs and Border Protection did not exist before 9/11. It's a part of the Department of Homeland Security. Customs and Border Protection is 60,000 agents. 60,000 agents, and Customs and Border Protection, they are the folks that are, the blue uniformed officers that you see at border crossings. But Customs and Border Protection also has an air and marine division, which means it has an Air Force, it has a Navy, it has Special Forces units, it has a lot of different components to it. 60,000, why is 60,000 significant? For example, Ecuador's army is 25,000 people. So it's more than double the size of Ecuador's army. You add so Border Patrol is a part of Customs and Border Protection. That's 21,000 agents is part of Customs and Border Protection. So we're talking about significant changes. Add 20,000, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, did not exist before 9/11. Components of it were part of Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, but ICE did not exist before 9/11. ICE is now 20,000 agents. So you add 60,000 plus 20,000, you have 80,000. You add to that approximately 650,000 police, with which Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection, and ICE are working with, and you have a whole fundamentally different, you have a post 9/11 reality and that's what I try to this is what I try to look at in this book. The book itself looks at this expansion. It looks at this expansion through a number of different angles. I'm going to start with one of the angles right now, and that's the money angle. So with the expansion of all the expansion, obviously the budgets have grown quite big. For example, one example is the fiscal 2012 budget for immigration and border enforcement was $18 billion for the U.S. federal government. Now that number is significant. The number is significant for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is that number is more than all other federal law enforcement agencies combined. So the DEA, the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, a number of other ones, they all combined to be $14.4 billion. Immigration, border enforcement, mainly through CBP and ICE, was $18 billion in 2012, and it's about the same now. So there's been, considering that the budget for Border Patrol in the early 1990s was about $320 million, there's been significant changes. And one of the significant changes that you can see is what I have here on the slide. Has anybody heard of this, the Border Security Expo? Border Security Expo is now an annual event. It started in 2005. It's, as you can see, it's located in Phoenix in Arizona. This slide kind of speaks for itself: intelligence, collaboration, technology, innovation. So who do you think's there? So high officials from the Department of Homeland Security, right? Border Patrol people, ICE people, a lot of law enforcement people, people looking to buy things. Who are they buying them from? Private industry, right? So it's the fusion of the U.S. federal government, particularly the Department of Homeland Security, but also people from abroad, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, coming there to look at different technologies for border enforcement, looking at those budgets, the growth that I was just talking about. And let me show you some slides about what this kind of looks like. For example, when you go in to the Border Security Expo, they're very high ceilings. It's in the Phoenix Convention Center, so you have high ceilings and you have banners coming down, and banners from companies that probably a lot of people have heard of: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, different companies like that. But you also see, you look up and see a surveillance balloon. They're always there. They're called aerostats officially. If you notice on the bottom of that balloon, there's a high-powered camera attached to that. I talked to one of the vendors about this, and he said, with that camera on that balloon, I can read the words off your page. And I said, no, you can't. And he said, yes, I can. And he started manipulating with a kind of an Xbox sort of thing. He started manipulating the camera. It zoomed in on my page, and there it was, the words on my notebook right on this big screen. So you're talking about pretty high-powered technology. This is what I would call the masterpiece of last year's Border Security Expo. Masterpiece because it was right in the middle of the convention hall. I went to it almost directly because you can see there's a lookout tower up top. And from the lookout tower, I thought I could see a good view of the entire convention hall and see the 130 vendors below, and all the different people walking below. So I climb up the stairs, and to my left on those stairs are pictures. The pictures are of this tower, an anti-ballistic tower, withstanding fireballs that literally consumed this anti-ballistic tower. Now, are there fireballs hitting our border, the U.S.-Mexico border? Are there? Because I've never seen one. I've never seen a fireball. It reminded me of, I actually talked to a vendor from Raytheon. He had what it was, have you ever seen the Charlie Brown Christmas tree? The kind of depressed Christmas tree? It was technology that looked like that, but it was called acoustic boomerang technology. And he said, I want to mount these on the border wall. That's what I think should be done. And he said, well, this technology, it tracks, if somebody shoots a gun, it tracks where the bullet came from, and then law enforcement can go after them. And I said, whoa, bullets are flying over the border? And he said, yeah, more than you'd be surprised. And I said, really? And he said, not every day. And then he paused and said, every other day. And I went, yeah, the bullets you hear about are flying from the United States side to the Mexican side. Like in the case of Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez, a young 16-year-old boy who was shot by the Border Patrol in October of 2012 when a Border Patrol agent shot across the border 12 times while Jose Antonio was walking to meet his brother at a store. So the bullets you hear about come from the U.S. side to the Mexican side. Maybe occasionally, but I have not, and I look at this issue constantly on a daily basis. It's very rare you hear about bullets flying over the border. This is also kind of the technology you see, typical like night vision goggles. You can see, what you can start to see with this is the kind of militarization, the military mind, the kind of movement of the battlefield to the border, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But those are night vision goggles, tactical vests, all this kind of stuff is sold. FLIR I heard that FLIR was FLIR based in Portland? Does anybody know that? Somebody told me that before. Anyhow, they're always there. They have high-powered cameras. They have a couple of contracts already with Customs and Border Protection because it's not just your job, it's your life. That's their slogan. There's another typical. This one is so this vendor, it's Brief Relief. I know the vendor. I go there every year. I've gone to a bunch of trade shows, but I go to this one every year. And I actually know the vendor, and the vendor's, hey, how you doing? Every time I come, and he gives me a sample bag, and that, as you can figure out, is a urine bag. They sell urine bags. I guess they're trying to sell it to Department of Homeland Security or Border Patrol, which is interesting because Border Patrol often is patrolling areas that are pretty far out there with lots of bushes or cactus or, But there's a chemical composition. So what happens is and it seems to be only made for men, but there's a chemical composition, and it'll consolidate or crystallizes the urine if you pee into the bag. But the purpose of me showing this is that there's lots of businesses besides technology, guns, that sort of thing. There's all kinds of businesses. There's ready-to-eat meals. There's Ray-Ban was there selling military-grade sunglasses. There's all kinds of different companies that are looking to profit off what is called what many call the border bonanza, right? DRS Technologies, that's another. I thought this particular slogan was interesting because you draw the line, we'll help you secure it. So is it that simple? Is it that simple? Like if I draw a line, but I have enough money to pay DRS to help it secure it, I draw the line between the hall here. So you can't move to that side and you can't move to that side. But DRS will come and secure it. So make sure that happens. Is that what they're saying? Like who draws, it raises a lot of questions at the very least. Who draws the line? What is really behind this? I talked to this vendor for quite a while. The technology is Freedom on the Move. Freedom on the Move, this was a small Tucson company, and this vendor described what his technology was, which is this. It's a camera built on a camera mast that would be on the bed of the truck that you could lift up or bring down with an Xbox. But the way he explained his technology was pretty vivid. He described the border in kind of football terms, right? Like American football terms. The U.S. border itself was a line of scrimmage, right? So border crossers crossed the U.S. border, U.S.-Mexico border, that is, while being undetected, right? Why are they crossing undetected? Well, that's because of what we were discussing before. Surveillance, walls, agents concentrated in urban areas. Urban areas were traditional crossing places. Now people can't cross through the urban areas. So the idea was that people would circumvent those areas. If they were to circumvent those areas, this is the official idea from Border Patrol, if they would find themselves in areas that were so deadly, so isolated, so dangerous that people would choose by their own volition, by the very danger of the situation, not to cross. Well, this strategy was called prevention by deterrence. It was implemented in the mid-1990s. It was implemented right after the North American Free Trade Agreement was implemented in Mexico. Nafta in Mexico, the post-Nafta era of Mexico, and the amount of immigration that came from Mexico was at unprecedented levels throughout the late 1990s and up through the early 2000s. It's gone down a little bit now. It's gone down, but it was at unprecedented levels. So you have all this kind of concentration of surveillance, of agents, and you have the severe funnel effect happening. So you have, where I live in the Arizona desert, you have a lot of people crossing into those desert areas, right? And that's what Freedom on the Move was going to deal with. So when people cross through those areas, they often have to walk, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're hearing 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days. Is it possible to carry enough water? No, it's impossible. I just interviewed a woman who was in a shelter in Nogales, Mexico, and she talked about walking 8 days. She talked about climbing through the mountains because it's expanded so much that people are climbing through the mountains. They ran out of water after 3 or 4 days. They ran out of food. They were drinking like black water that you get out of like what cattle drink if they found it. She said she started hallucinating at one point. She said that she thought she heard the mountains speaking to her. They reached a road after 8 days walking, and she said that half the people in the group, she looked around and 4 or 5 people, that she saw their noses spontaneously bursting with blood. A number of people turned themselves in at that point, including her. In fact, she passed out, and then she woke up, and she had what are those, electric shock machine on her. So she thought she believed that she had passed away and come back to life. She was revitalized by the machine. Her story is a very typical one, actually. As dramatic as that sounds, it's very typical of what you hear in the Arizona deserts. 6,000 remains of people have been found in the U.S.-Mexico borderland since the 1990s. Almost 2,500 in Arizona alone. And this is remains found. A lot of people think it's a lot more because there's so many people looking for their disappeared loved ones. So the idea of Freedom on the Move was that they would come what he called the last mile. So they crossed the line of scrimmage. They could walk 4, 5, 6 days. Then the last mile, they would come in like a roving linebacker. A roving linebacker in football is the secondary of a football defense. So if you get past the first layer, this is the second layer. Freedom on the Move comes in and will help make the arrest. You can see over the hills because you can lift up your camera and go down. He's talking to me like I'm an actual person that might buy his equipment, right? I'm obviously not. I'm a journalist. I'm writing down everything he's saying. But that's the kind of how it's promoted, you know, and why wouldn't he be enthusiastic about trying to sell this? I mean, Department of Homeland Security is buying it. Customs and Border Protection has more and more money to buy it. All the market projections for what is considered a border security market show a market that is increasing at least a 5% clip. One market projection has it's a Homeland Security and emergency market management market, which is mainly border security, a global projection at $544 billion by 2018. It's a lot of money. There's even for video surveillance, which is what the market right in 2012 was $12 billion. In 2020, $40 billion. That's triple. It's growing. It's going to be triple the market in 2020, according to market projections. And on top of that, 3.4 trillion video hours of footage is what they anticipate in 2020. And so if you don't know what that means, that's 340 million years. I did the calculation. 340 million years of video footage taken in 1 year. This is globally with devices like this. So this is a booming market. And the other real significant thing that this vendor told me at the very end of our conversation, he told me the following quote. He said, "We are bringing the battlefield to the border." And he said that mainly because Strongwatch, which that's the name of the company right down there, was selling this sort of technology to the military. And the military, with wars, winding down in different places abroad, a lot of companies are now looking to repurpose some of their equipment, and in this case, repurpose it towards a border security market. So it's not only Strongwatch, it's the big companies as well, like I was mentioning before, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. Most of the companies are looking to create more of their technologies used in wars abroad for a border policing mission. And that's what he meant by bringing the battlefield to the border. He said it in more raw and vivid terms, but I've heard variations of that for years. So this idea of transferring our wars abroad, at least in somewhat of a way, to the borderlands, is definitely happening. This slide right here. Oftentimes you go to I go to the Border Security Expo. It almost seems like a pavilion of science fiction, right? You also see mini drones. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a mini drone. And they have, there's companies that are looking at locust wings, right? So they have drones the size of locusts, and they can fly around and with a camera and get, there's a drone there that you can fit in your backpack and then deploy. I think that one won an award. So some of that stuff looks like science fiction, but you look at what's on the border now, and 20 years ago, that might have seemed like science fiction too, right? So who's not to say we might not be seeing our future in a lot of ways in those pavilions. Like, for example, behind these guys, these are CBP people. Behind them are 3 of the Predator B drones that are used for surveillance missions on our borders, south and north, and in the Caribbean as well. 20 years ago, that probably would have been, what are you talking about? Big mosquito-looking things like that are going to be on our borders? Or abroad? These are just pictures of what, I actually interviewed lots of Border Patrol agents for this book as well. I interviewed a guy that was on an ATV detail. Lots of interesting stories. The agents brought me into their world in many different ways. Such a range of views, even, with the agents, from really gung-ho, and the guy that I interviewed that was on the ATV team was actually very gung-ho, to people that were very conflicted with Border Patrol. I interviewed one guy that was close to retirement, and he is very critical, but he says, I gotta bite my tongue for the next 4 years, and then let me get my retirement. It's a Border Patrol job. Often for a starting person getting a job, you can earn almost $70,000 in the first year. So it's an enticing job for youth in the borderlands. Often look at that. That's one of the best paying jobs out there. But back to the idea of bringing the battlefield to the border. This is a Special Forces unit of Customs and Border Protection. So you're seeing this kind of stuff. That's a picture I took myself. It's a Striker. A Striker is a really sophisticated armored vehicle made by the company General Dynamics. And I was traveling on the about 15 miles north of the border in New Mexico, and I saw that. I passed it, I came back. When I came back, the soldier was actually below, but he came up. And so, we just waved at each other, and I took a picture, but I was wondering what this was, because he's pointed at the border, right? He's about 10, 15 miles from the border. And it's not a weaponized tank. It's an armored vehicle, but he's looking through probably really sophisticated surveillance technology. Probably, I don't know what he's looking into. But a little bit down the road, I see another one of these guys, and right next to him, a green striped Border Patrol vehicle. A little bit down the road further, next to a green striped Border Patrol vehicle. A little down the road further, I come to the forward operating base. For those who don't know what a forward operating base is, they're used also in Afghanistan and Iraq, a base used to, usually a rudimentary base used to establish a presence in an isolated area. U.S. Border Patrol has more and more of these sorts of bases throughout the U.S. Southwest. A little bit further, there is actually a forward operating base. I get to this base. There's several strikers on the base. So it's obviously a Border Patrol military mission. And this particular one was a 5-day thing, but these sorts of missions happen all the time. So, can anyone guess where this is? Arizona. Any other guesses? Hillsboro. Any other guesses? San Diego. Okay, the closest was Hillsboro, actually. But it's on the other side of the country. Do you know, it's in Sodus, New York State, about 15 miles outside of Rochester. Do you all locate where Rochester is? Do you know where the border is around Rochester? Where is it? It's below, so the closest actual border crossing is Niagara Falls, right, or Buffalo, which is about 1.5 or 2 hours away. But Rochester is right below Lake Ontario. The shoreline, which is 12 miles out, is officially the international border. Sodus, New York, where, as you can see, that's a New York State trooper. The Border Patrol agent is talking with a New York State trooper. They're in front of a grocery store. This is in Wayne County, New York. What Wayne County is famous for is its apple orchards. Wayne County gets about 8,000 farm workers per year, many of them undocumented farm workers. Border Patrol did not exist in Rochester until the year 2006. The first station was formed in 2006. The justification for the station was a ferry service from Toronto to Rochester. The ferry service ended after 1 year. Do you think they closed the Border Patrol station? No. Do you think they moved their personnel to another place because the justification of it was gone? No. Do you think they hired more agents? Yes, it's true. They hired more agents. They went from 4 to 26. That sort of expansion of 4 to 26 is mimicked along the whole U.S.-Canada border. It's gone from 300 to 3,000. The rate of growth on the U.S.-Canada border for Border Patrol is higher than the rate of growth on the U.S.-Mexico border. U.S.-Canada border is 4,000 miles long. U.S.-Mexico border is 2,000 miles long. The amount of agents is drastically lower, of course. You talk about 26 agents in Rochester. You talk about 650 in the Tucson station where I live. So drastically smaller, but the rate of growth is higher. If you look at the U.S., remember the USA Patriot Act passed right after September 11th, 2001? That stipulated 300%, mandated a 300% growth to the U.S.-Canada border. So one of the things they talk about in SOTUS, so one of the reasonings, the official reasoning for the increase on the U.S.-Canada border has to do with a shift of missions. And the mission shifted to a priority mission of terrorism and stopping weapons of mass destruction from crossing our borders. Does anybody know how many weapons of mass destruction have crossed our borders?
We don't know.
We don't know, but 0 documented. Does anybody know how many people affiliated with terrorist organizations have crossed our border? 0 that have been documented. Now, the question is, we don't know. Well, it's possible we don't know, right? It's possible that something has happened that we don't know about, that's not public. But as far as public information, which has justified the buildup, there is no documented evidence, publicly stated evidence that the priority mission, that has been one terrorist or one weapon of mass destruction that has crossed our borders. But that's the justification for the buildup on the U.S.-Canada border. What I hear about in SOTUS, and I spent some time in SOTUS here, was the laundromat. The New York State troopers would put a checkpoint in front of the laundromat on Sundays during the harvesting season. The laundromat, of course, people who work all week long might want to do their laundry on Sundays. So that's what people were talking about. The state troopers, there'd be 3 or 4 cars, and then alongside them would be one of the green stripe vehicles. If the state troopers were to suspect that the person did not have documents, then they would be transferred to the green stripe vehicle for further questioning. That's what people were talking about in SOTUS. People in Detroit, I did a lot of research in Detroit and Southwest Detroit. Southwest Detroit has a huge Latin American population, mainly Mexican. People talk about Border Patrol presence there like hearing somebody talk about it in El Paso. The Catholic language Mass at St. Anne's Church, there were Border Patrol agents outside of it when Mass let out. The Latino Family Services Center was staked out by Border Patrol agents on bikes who then questioned people coming in. Fishermen went to fish in the Detroit River, were questioned while they were fishing. You hear story after story after story after story after story, so much to the point where you think they're all around, but you go around and actually there's a lot less, but still they're all around. It's one of those kind of strange scenarios. But in Canada, in the technologies I was just talking about, have also expanded to the U.S.-Canada border. If you go to around Detroit again, St. Clair River, there's 11 surveillance towers with high-powered cameras and radar built on a contract by Boeing that looks into the river, but feeds into this big, what they call a war room, what CBP has called the gold standard of operational control rooms, with a video wall double the size of this wall, where agents kind of stare at the monitoring screens, looking for anything crossing the river. So that costs $30 million too. So this kind of new expansion is really happening on the north in a lot of ways. That picture right there is an Amtrak train. There's lots of transportation checks where agents will be going onto trains and buses, particularly Greyhound. Just to let you know, these buses are traveling east to west. They're not traveling across the border. So this train could be coming from what, New York City maybe? And agents will get on and ask people. They'll go from seat to seat to seat asking people their citizenship. And they actually, FOIA'd, which is a Freedom of Information Act, the arrest records of these transportation raids. This is a Rochester station again. And they actually classified their arrest by complexion of skin. And 70% were people of medium complexion, 70% were people of Latin American descent, and 0.8% were people of fair complexion, according to the exact words they were using on their documents. So that's the part of the book is looking at this expansion to the north, into the interior. I look a lot into Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the kind of building of the detention center apparatus and the collaboration between ICE and police in different parts of the interior of the country, which I'm looking through it in the framework of the idea: has the southern border moved? Is the southern border moving to the northern border? Is the southern border moving to the interior? Is this sort of phenomenon happening? I also go outside of the country. Anybody have any idea where this might be? Where? Yeah, very close to. That's on the border of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. This gentleman right here is the commander of the newly formed Border Patrol of the Dominican Republic. Newly formed, it didn't exist before 2006. A U.S. group went to Dominican Republic, issued a report, and saying that there was a lot of illicit activity happening across the border there. The border was porous. The Dominican Republic should form its own border patrol. A month later, the president of the Dominican Republic issued a presidential decree declaring that they would form their border patrol. And it's called CESFRONT, and this was created. And it's been in operation since about 2007, 2008. They've received funding from the U.S. government. They've also received training from U.S. Border Patrol agents. At this point, I took the picture. Actually, he's about to yell at me in this picture because I wasn't supposed to take his picture. But this is on the base that they have in Dajabon. This guy behind him is detained. He's a Haitian man who was detained, and he was questioning. There's another Haitian woman sat in front of him who he had just said that the documents that she had were false. So I took his picture right after he said that, and so he's rising up to tell me that I can't take his picture. And that's the actual border between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. The river is it's a river. You can see there's Haitian people in the river, kids playing, people washing clothes, that sort of thing. And on the Dominican side, you can almost see a rudimentary version of the U.S.-Mexico border, right? It's like protest barricades, but behind that you have the border guards sitting there, X's, much like the U.S. Border Patrol agents do, one after the other, just guarding, a certain area. I went there just to look at the phenomenon of the export of the border model abroad, and it's more than you'd think. U.S. Border Patrol has done trainings in over 100 countries, and Dominican Republic's only one of them. Famously, Iraq, Afghanistan. This idea of countries needing to form their own borders and harden their own borders is a global phenomenon, and if you go back to those market figures I was just discussing, that's what's driving this market more than anything else. It's happening all over the world. Mexico just declared that they're going to form its own border patrol. So between Mexico and on the Mexican-Guatemalan border, border forces are being formed in Central American countries. This idea of border forces is spreading throughout the globe. And with that, I will end my presentation, open it up to discussion. But I wanted to mention, I've been ending the presentation with this, and this is actually, does anybody recognize this picture? It is from southern Mexico, a very famous town in southern Mexico. Begins with an O, Oaxaca. That's Oaxaca City. That's the Cathedral of Oaxaca City. And these are sculptures, and the sculptures are made by an artist. And he said this artist went back to his community. He's a Oaxacan artist. He went back to his community in Oaxaca, and he was so surprised after 15 years being gone that there was nobody there. Like all his loved ones, his family members, like his cousins, his friends, his aunts, his uncles, everyone had left. And he describes the silence, and the silence is what inspired him to do this. And what he did was he said, I'm going to repopulate my town. I'm going to recreate my town person by person by person. So he made 2,500 sculptures and then one for himself and put them all in his community. And at this point, he had transferred all this to Oaxaca City. So it just literally, these 2,500 sculptures were all over the center of the city of Oaxaca. It was quite impressive to run into them. But I always think that's a good way to end this, because in a very tragic way, it's also inspiring. And it speaks to the bigger questions, that I think we should be dealing with, of why people are choosing to leave a lot of places that they love, to go other places. What are the reasons behind it? Do people really want to go? Those sorts of questions are huge ones, and I think they're at the core of this, why I would write such a book, I guess. But with that, I'll leave it to for questions, discussion, whatever, critique, any way you want to take it.
Do political activists ever get the extra attention, or writers such as yourself from the BP that you share with you?
You mean as far as?
When you meet a BP agent, whether you're crossing the border or not, do they know who you are?
Yeah, okay, yeah. With me, I haven't had trouble yet. I'm expecting it. Yeah, there's been activists, people WikiLeaks, for example, there's been activists associated with WikiLeaks who have crossed the border and there's one big thing that's happening and continues to happen is people's laptops and electronic devices have been confiscated. The ACLU did a lawsuit, and I think between 2010 and 2012, 6,000 electronic devices were confiscated. And the Supreme Court, they lost that case. So it's been determined that Customs and Border Protection can confiscate your laptops. Among those who've had their laptops confiscated have been people that have been activists. Laura Poitras, does that name ring a bell with anyone? Laura Poitras, she was one of the people that Edward Snowden, who brought that portfolio of information about the National Security Agency. She's a documentary filmmaker. She's been actually stopped at the border between 2000. She wrote this film. She directed a film about Iraq in 2006 that was nominated for an Academy Award. She's been stopped 22 times coming across the border. And her descriptions of the questioning are pretty intense. I would recommend that you, if you're interested, to go and look, because these are long interrogations. One time she said she brought out a pencil because she wanted to write down the interrogating officer's name and jot down exactly what was happening, and they told her that she had to put her pencil away, and so they went back and forth about the pencil for a while, and finally they said, you're going to use that pencil as a weapon, so put it away. So she eventually put her pencil away.
Isn't a huge reason why this is happening is because of Nafta and the fact that they corporatized Mexico and polluted it, and nobody wants to live there anymore because it's so badly polluted?
I think NAFTA and what NAFTA represents, and the kind of neoliberal economic model that comes right along with NAFTA, the everything about it has been a really significant influence. People mention the corn, the the idea that small farmers would be put in direct competition with large agribusiness grain movers who are subsidized and who could underprice their corn, led to, their statistics vary, but right away it led to, one of the statistics you constantly hear is about 2 million corn farmers lost their livelihood right after NAFTA was passed. So what happens when people lose their livelihood? It's, if anyone loses their job, they go from one, if anyone loses their job, they're going to try to find another job where a job's offered, and that's definitely a driving force of immigration. I think NAFTA's huge. I think, in fact, NAFTA is so huge, I think, in this, that what I find troubling is every time the talk about immigration, that NAFTA or that sort of model is not discussed at all. If you look at immigration reform, like the 1,000-page thing that that's the Senate passed, there's not a word about NAFTA in there. There's not a word about what are the reasons why people would choose to leave their home countries, or what sort of not to say maybe it's not totally NAFTA, but maybe it's a huge influence. And if that's an influence and that has to do with an economic model that's coming from Washington even, then that's a significant thing, and that has to be addressed in any sort of holistic, I would consider, immigration reform. And that would be if they're looking to stop people from coming across the border, well, I think that would, that might be a lot more effective than putting up walls, Yes.
Speaking of NAFTA, I know there's been a lot of discussion about changes to NAFTA. I can't think off the top of my head. I was trying to look it up what they're calling it now, but they're trying to expand NAFTA. Do you know what that entails and if it's supposed to be helpful or do you think it'll be more harmful?
So whether the expansion of NAFTA would be more helpful or harmful. So I don't know. I think what you're referring to is, I think it's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I haven't looked into what I've heard is that I've heard it described in these terms, NAFTA on steroids. If it is indeed NAFTA on steroids, I could speak to NAFTA a lot more than I can speak to that. If it indeed is that, and if it indeed will have the similar consequences, then you can expect more of the same. It's the sort of model that, the whole idea of NAFTA was that one of the ideas underlying NAFTA is that people would move from the agricultural sector to like the manufacturing sector. So one of the basic ideas of it is that people will migrate, whether it's within the country.
I was just kind of wondering, like, if maybe based on what we've seen caused by NAFTA, there might be tweaks to, I don't know, how they have it working now. I don't know the details.
Yeah, I don't know yeah, I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't go look at. I didn't. I mean, I addressed NAFTA. The book is more about it. Unfortunately, I couldn't get into trade agreements like I would have loved to. But yeah, I think hitting on the idea of trade agreements and their expansion is just a really critical, very critical thing to look at. So I would encourage everyone to look. I encourage myself, actually, I'll say, to look more into the TPP, I think it's called, and see what kind of impacts it might have.
I'm curious if you recall the numbers versus the northern borders versus the southern borders in arrests. Are they proportionate or are they usually disproportionate, I guess is what I'm asking.
I think you're still going to find them as fairly disproportionate. One number was from ICE from the northern border, and I think it was around 50,000 people that they deported. That was a deportation number from the northern border. From the southern border, now this arrest number, I think it's, so fiscal year 2013, they had over 400, Border Patrol had over 400,000 arrests. I've been assuming that was their statistics from the southern border, but yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I'm assuming that would be around maybe 400 to 50,000 would be approximately it, but I'd have to double check that. Yep. Yes.
Hi, I used to live in southern Arizona, a little town, you've probably been there, called Arivaca.
Oh, yeah?
And there's a Facebook page now, a group called Border Patrol Checkpoints. Residents of the town, such a really tiny little town, but are just getting really fed up with the Border Patrol checkpoint there at the Motto, right on the Tucson-Nogales Highway. And it's just, there's a lot of protests going on, every week down there now, just because it's so intrusive.
Yeah, this gentleman's talking about Arivaca. Arivaca is a small town. It's in southern Arizona. There's a checkpoint right down the road. We didn't discuss checkpoints at all today, did we? But checkpoints, Border Patrol checkpoints are in the southwest and in the north, are just about everywhere. I can't go to the border, especially in the southwest. In the north, I think they're more temporary. But in the southwest, I can't go to the border and back without going through a checkpoint. And what he's referring to is there's a town. I think this might be the first action of this type. There's a town. The town of Arivaca is actually protesting their checkpoint. And they're going out and doing checkpoint monitoring. They're going out and setting up a camp and watching the Border Patrol in their checkpoint. And which is it's new. That'd be a good thing to follow to see what happens with that. But the idea of checkpoints is a big one. I don't know. Border Patrol actually operates in a 100-mile zone, a 100-mile jurisdiction. So from the border into the interior of the country, 100 miles. So they can put up checkpoints anywhere from the border 100 miles in, which means ACLU has called it a constitution-free zone. They call it a constitution-free zone because Border Patrol actually has extra constitutional powers, powers that local law enforcement doesn't have. They can set up these checkpoints, for example. They can look and they can determine if they have reasonable suspicion that you are smuggling drugs, if you are undocumented, if you are a national security threat. They can pull you over into what they call secondary and ask you more questions and even search your vehicle. And that's what people are protesting in Arivaca. There's people that go, like trying to go to school or an appointment in Tucson or something like that, and they have to go through the checkpoint and get help, just like basic day-to-day sorts of things. Yes?
Are you thinking about turning this into a film?
I've been approached by a filmmaker, but I don't know if it's going to happen. But that's a good idea. If you want to do it, let me know. Well, thanks a lot.